Morning, everyone. So this video is on a semi-interesting topic to people. I think it's about Warhammer being a game of odds and not a game of averages, and it comes up a lot in the USA Discord, UB stuff. UB dice, all this kind of crap. And what I find very interesting is, you know, people are very shocked when the dice don't roll average, but that's like super normal for dice not to roll average. In fact, they shouldn't roll average all the time. And if you think about it, right, if you roll, I don't know, 6 dice, you expect half of them to be 4 plus, but it's not crazy for half of them not to be 4 plus, right? It's pretty actually freaking normal for it to happen. So I find it very funny when people talk about UB dice, and even more so when you actually do the math on what the chance of a particular thing happening is, and you realize that it's like 10% or 15% or even 1%. I mean, 1 out of 100 sounds crazy, but it doesn't even sound crazy. 1 out of 100, that should happen 1 out of every 100 rolls, and you roll a lot of dice at UB. So, you know, that's why I find it so funny sometimes. Yes, there are things that are like 1 in thousands and stuff like that. I mean, even the guy who rolled 7 6s and 10 dice was, I think, 1 in 3,000 ish, which is very low and very unlikely. And sure, it sucks, especially in the moment. But it's not like so unfathomable that it should never happen in a game of Warhammer. I do think some of that comes from UB's display. So as you can see here, you roll dice in UB, and we'll just roll like 20 dice, right? You just roll some dice, and the thing is, everything is lined out for you in order, right? And so like humans are, it's easier for us to see patterns, right? Like when you look at these dice, and you can be like, oh, look how many 6s. But it also comes down to, and these are actually not too crazy of rolls. I was hoping for like a crazy roll. No, they happen eventually. Like this might be a crazy roll, right? You might see this and be like, oh shit. But also, I think when it comes to rolls like this, like I said, it's perfectly can happen in the world of statistics. The perception of UB, like how it displays and what you're thinking about, really plays a part in this. So I look at a roll like this and think, if I needed 2s to wound, it would be a little bit below average. If I needed 3s to hit, I'd feel really bad. If I had a 6-up armor save, I'd be like, meh. And, if I was a demon, I'd feel meh too, right? So contextually, it kind of matters what you're looking for, right? If you needed 2s to wound and you only had to do 10 wounds, you look at this and be like, great, it happened. And you might take a look and be like, oh, that was a lot of 2s, but you wouldn't post it to the UB channel because it doesn't fit your needs. Even though this roll is pretty unlikely, or a little skewy, I'd say. It's not unlikely. I don't like saying that. But it's the context, right? It's always the context of it. And I think UB displays it really nicely. So think about how you actually roll dice in Warhammer, or at least how I think about it. If I'm rolling 12 dice, and anyone who plays me knows I only play with 12 dice, and I refuse to roll more than 12 dice. I roll like batches of 12 if needed, just for speed and stuff. I hate people who pick anyway, that's not the point. But if I'm rolling 12 dice and I need 2s to wound, I'm looking for 1s. And I don't really care. The only number that matters to me is how many 1s I roll, right? If I'm needing 6s to save, all I look at is 6s to wound, or 6s for saves. So a lot of the skewness of the dice gets lost in those rolls because you're only looking for what you need. And so you only kind of say, oh my god, UB dice, if it skews away or for you massively, right? Because as I said with this example over here, it's all about the context of what you need. It's a skewy roll no matter what you say, but there's so much context behind this roll that people point out the ones that are bad for them, that skew in the direction that they don't need, right? No one's gonna post, like I said, if I needed 2s to wound and I posted this, would you all be like, oh, that sucks, you rolled the what, 1.5 below average, which is just fine? No, you wouldn't post it because you'd be like pretty happy with what happened, right? I also find it kind of funny, and I've seen this a lot on UB because I watch a lot of games, is when somebody rolls like to hit and then they complain, And then by the time the armor saves into wounds are done, it's average, or like one below average, which is crazy to me that people bitch about one below average. Um, because if you plan for average, here's a quote I have from the forums. If you plan for average, you're going to fail half the time. It's not exactly 50-50, but that's a good sentiment, right? If you're like, on average, this combat goes, I don't know, I win by 1, but then you look at the math and like there's a 40% chance that you lose by 2 or something crazy, then that wasn't a good fight, technically, unless, given the context of the situation. So that's why I say Warhammer is not a game of averages. It's a game of odds, right? When I charge something, you can go and say, oh, on average, I win by 2, but, sometimes you got to look at the other side. You'll say this charges this, and this is just an example, right? I might look at it and say, well, on average, 12 attacks, 4s, 6 hits, 4, 5s, 2 wounds, probably 1 wound through. He does 3, 4. He probably does 1 or 2. So you think about that, and you're like, okay, well, flank charge, maybe, probably keep my big flank, that's 3. And then I probably get a wound, so 4. So if I'm going to break, he's going to need to do like 5 wounds to break me. And so, like, you're not just calculating what's the average, but you kind of calculate the other side of it. Like, how much downside is there, right? What's the chance that I break if I charge him in the flank? And that's probably a good charge in general. But it happens a lot. I think people don't actually think about things like maybe this, for example. And this isn't a perfect example, but, or this is probably a better example. Who's going to win this fight in the end? The Knights are going to win the fight because they're going to probably not take any wounds, hold, and then turn and kill them. But in the context of Warhammer strategy-wise, if you go in this, you're like, I have charge and flank. He only has 3 attacks total. So at the worst case, he does 3 wounds. I do 0. I have flank charge. And I lose by 1. I'm on a rerollable 7. So what's the odds of him doing 3 wounds and me failing a rerollable 7? That's the chance that I don't pin him in place, right? That's part of Warhammers, doing stuff like that, like pinning people in place and taking those odds. But that's the thing, it's odds. It's not averages. I think looking at averages really is going to get you in trouble. Averages are useful, I think, when looking at spells and what they give for you. I think you can actually do the math on a lot of spells, especially buffs, and pretty much say what is the best buff for you. Is reroll to hit better than reroll to wound? Obviously, it matters what your to wound or to hit rolls are, right? If your to hit rolls are 3+, and your to wound rolls are 4+, you want to reroll to wound. You want to reroll the dice that's harder to do. Rerolling 2s is not as good as rerolling 6. You don't get as much from it. This comes up in Hellfire a lot when you have Veilwalker, because what's better, making them reroll armor saves or making yourself reroll to hit? Well, if you're wounding on 3s and they need 3+ armor, so a 5+ armor, it's statistically better to make them reroll the armor. And then sometimes I think I don't know if people know that. A lot of people probably know that one. That's a pretty simple math one. But I sometimes feel like people do it the other way. Like they feel like their luck is bad, so they want to re-roll, their own dice or some stupid shit like that. And an interesting math problem. So I do a lot of math in UB chat, and it comes from this thing, as you can see here. This is a model I made 8 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know. I was at my first job. Probably 9 or 10 years ago I made this. And I've added to it over time, and I know Ben Mitchell has tried to update it to add poison in, and still, I think the math is right, but we had to fix it. So, but anyway, this is where I come to with a lot of my math, right? So when that guy needed, and you can put whatever you want here, to hit, to wound, it's the same math, right? When he needed 7 6s, here's the chance that you get 7 or more 6s. It's this little percent here. But this is something I want to show people. It's the distribution of the chances of wounds, right? So here's some examples, right? 30 hits, right? And we're just going to do this. We're going to put some numbers here. So they average 5. I'm going to give you 3 scenarios that all average 5, right? This, right? And these are basic scenarios. We don't need to do anything super crazy, but and could we do one more? No. Yeah, we could do 10 needing 4+. So 10 needing 4+, and we'll just stick it in here. There. sense, right? So look at this. This is 6 attacks, 10 attacks, 15 attacks, 30 attacks, right? 10, half, 2/3, yeah. So, or 1/3. Yeah, the only thing we didn't do is 9. You know what, fuck it. No, we can't do 2/3 of 1/3 is, yeah, 1/3, 5. It says it's a fraction. You can't do it. So this is interesting, right? Look at this right here. This is the average. If you're rolling 6 dice and you need 2 plus, it's not 50-50. People like to think averages are the same. Averages doesn't mean shit sometimes. They all average 5, but you have a way better chance to hit the average on the low dice rolls than you do on the high dice rolls. And part of that is the law of large numbers, where, you know, as you roll a ton of dice, you're way more likely to get near the average, right? And you're not going to spike as crazily as you would otherwise. Now, one thing that's interesting to note here, and this is where you start going about, you know, what's better, 6 attacks, 30 attacks, 15 attacks. Depends on what you need. If you need to do like 4 wounds, I really want to roll 6 dice needing 2s, because look at the odds here. Look at the odds here. Here's a good one right here. If you roll 30 dice needing 6s, right, the chance that you get 3 6s is 90% chance. Pretty good. But the chance that you get 3 needing 2 pluses is 99. So like you want this, if you like consistency in the dice roll, variability or sorts. But what's the advantage of big dice? There's 0% chance you get 7 wounds on 6 dice. Makes sense, right? But look at this. You have a 22% chance to get 7 wounds when they're rolling 30 dice and needing 6s. That's pretty nice. That's a 1 out of 5. So you can spike higher here. Like, you have a chance to spike higher. You're less likely to get the average because 57, but that is kind of translated in some of your percents to go above the average, right? So this is why I say averages only mean so much. I can average 5, but the context behind, the dice rolling really matters. So this is kind of a nice, cute example of the more dice you get, the closer this is going to be to 50-50, because the law of large numbers, right? If you're rolling 10,000 dice and you need to roll 6s, you're likely going, even if you roll that a million times, and you could do a simulation, and I've done simulations, you're going to get very close to the average all the time. You're not going to skew. So let's take a better example, 6,000 dice. You're rolling 6,000 dice and you need 6s. You're going to get close to 1,000 every time. And honestly, I don't have it up to do the math right now, but if you did that 10,000 times, you're probably not going anywhere above 1,100 or below 900 in those scenarios. I'm not 100% sure of the math on that, but the variability of 6,000 dice is so low that you're not going to skew as much as rolling like 6 dice, where you could easily, if you think about it this way, right, rolling 6,000 dice and needing 6s, which means or needing 2s, or 6s is 1,000. Anyway, this makes sense. Sorry, I'm trying to do the math in my head. But you know what I'm saying. Like, the more dice you roll, the more likely you're not going to skew too far from the average. Where, if you roll 6 dice, I mean, yes, you could roll, if you need 4. So 3 is the chance that you roll 3 ones, right? What's the chance you roll 2? It's very low. But it starts to not get too crazy. 6% chance to roll 10 dice and get 2 that aren't, only rolling 2 3 pluses. That's not, or it's 4 plus, sorry. Only getting 2 4 pluses on 10 dice is like 5.5%. Does that sound insane to you guys? That's not that insane. People like to think it's insane, but it's not that insane. But it also, I think it's good to know. I come here a lot for distributions because average is fine, but you want to go in. So a scenario happened last night. I was watching a game, and a Scourge had 2 wounds left, and he could have charged his Demon Prince Herald in the flank with Strength 6 Divine. So, I came here and I said, all right, what's the chance? So I'm in the flank, so I need 2 plus to hit. So I need 6 plus to wound, 4 plus to wound, and he has a ward save of 4 plus, and it's re-rolled because I'm divine, right? So fuck the average, 1.8%. What's the chance you kill him? Because that's the only thing that matters, is that you kill him before he attacks you. It's 60% chance. Pretty good. Not bad. And then you could say, well, what happens if how valuable is Glory of Gold? Obviously, reroll to wound is going to be good. It pops the chance up to 85%. And that's what matters. It doesn't matter. This average doesn't mean shit. You have to kill him or not, right? And the same goes, like, if he had 1 wound left, you see him this 90%, you're like, all right, but that could happen. I mean, in your head, you have to think, hey, shit, I might not kill him. 10% is not nothing. Then you say, maybe I'll get rerollable and I'm at 97%. Still can fail. It's 6 dice. You're rolling 6 dice, 6 attacks. I'm trying to think. Let's do this a little better. So I think what we need to do is, so we're doing 2+ to hit. So if we do 30 attacks with 6+ to hit, I think it's the same math. Actually, let's look. So we're looking at 2.1825, and so we're looking for that number again. So I think if I make this 6+ to hit's the same. Okay, it's the same math, but now it's only 94%. Why is that? More dice, less likely to. You're more likely to get your average, probably. Or are you? Actually, let's actually look at the distribution of this. Let's put it here. I actually don't know the answer. Now we're going to be interested, and we'll have to analyze it, right? So this one, we'll just put it here. So I don't know how far I cut it before, but let's just cut it here. So they average the same number. You're more likely to do 4. So in this case, rolling less dice is better, interestingly enough. But where does this extra math go, right? Where does this extra numbers go? Where it goes is the chance to do way more. Like, yeah, that's just how it works. So, but back to the point, this distribution is very interesting to look at because, like I said, average doesn't matter. I don't need this. I needed this. I also did some cool, this is a 2d6 calculator, so you'll see it changing no matter what I do. Essentially what it does is it takes this part of the math, like whatever's here, and it just makes it into as if you rolled a 2d6 magic missile. So we'll say, for example, I'm rolling Grave Calls with reroll to wound at a Scourge. 4+ rerolls, the 6 doesn't matter in this case. This always assumes. 3.5 makes sense, because you're normally going to get 7 hits, right? So 7 hits, and then let's see if the math makes sense. Make sure I'm not doing this. 7, and then 3/4. That's a date. All right, let's do it here. 0.75, and then it's 2 divided by 3. Yep. Okay. We're just making sure. I knew it was right, but now, like, it's very interesting. Okay, you average 3.5 wounds. What's the chance you one-shot the Scourge? Not bad, right? This doesn't feel. I feel like I did this last night and I thought it was higher than this. Did I put something wrong? 4+ rerollable, 5 + 4. Maybe this was 3+. I said it was 11. Oh, I did it wrong. I said 3 + 2. It's 4 + 2. 5% chance to one-shot the Scourge. You average 3.5, but let's say you did 5, and somebody's like, "Oh, that's way above average." It's not really. Hell, even 6 isn't that crazy to do. 13%. I'm shrugging my shoulders a lot because I think people don't understand math and how the math works, and in that these moments that happen are not crazy at all, and they like to think that it's the end of the freaking world because of it. So that's kind of the talk about skewness, and I'm hoping that little bit of, just seeing the math and it's kind of how I think too a lot of times. But when it comes to combats, it's so hard to do all the iterations, right? Because one, especially if it's a combat where, for example, these charge, right? He's going to go first. If he does 4 wounds, it changes the math on, like, you'd have to do, what's the chance that he kills one? What's the chance he doesn't kill one? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of math here to do. Because you can say on average, and he doesn't do this on average, but you can say on average he kills one, and then you get 8 attacks back, and you hit here, 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 and all this happens. But what happens if he just spikes a little low and doesn't kill one, and you get 4 extra attacks? That changes the math completely. So, that's why you can't rely on just straight averages. You have to look at it, at a higher level. And sometimes you'd love to be able to know the fight of, I don't know, what's the chance the Warriors break, or what's the chance, if you do this charge, what's the chance the Feldrax break? And maybe it's low, maybe it's not. But you have to go through all the iterations of things, because really, a lot of times in Warhammer, it's not how many wounds you do or take. I mean, that's obviously important, but sometimes people want to know, what's the chance that I break if I charge him, right? And I think that's a big thing, because breaking in your turn is one of the worst things in Warhammer, because they get a free reform and they get to charge the next turn. It's awful. So a lot of times when you charge in, you want to think about what's the chance I break, and you have to be like, oh, well, it's probably low. Like in that one example where you flank charge the Knights, and you say, oh, you know what? It's actually very unlikely I break here. It's actually pretty ridiculously unlikely that he breaks. But some people won't do this because they're scared of losing this thing. But if this dies and the Warriors are stuck here, and the next move you made was like, I don't know, fucking the Elder here, and then it's like, oh, these died, and then your turn you charge them and kill them, well, the trade is in your favor. I think people don't trade units enough sometimes. Like, everyone's willing to do the whole, oh, I'll give it my fast cav, to redirect. I've seen a lot of people like do shit like this where their like counter is like, they don't even have a counter. And I'm not saying you always have to have a counter charge, but so many people like just block people just to block people. And I hate it. Have a purpose at least. But anyway, that's not to do with math. That's another topic about strategy. So yeah, I think people just need to complain less about dice in general. You kind of have to make your own luck in a sense too. I think one thing, in playing an aggro army, sometimes it feels like I'm getting lucky with a charge or a break or a kill or something, and maybe it can be the other way too, where it feels like I'm getting unlucky. But at the same time, and maybe it's not an aggro army thing, but a play style thing, or just being, if somebody's better. But if you give yourself enough opportunities to get lucky without downside, you're gonna eventually hit one of them, right? If you think about it, like 11 Swift Strides, right? I don't know, I forgot what the odds are exactly, but they're not the highest, but not the lowest either. But they're 10 Swift Strides, right? If you take enough of them, and any one of them is game breaking, and the downside isn't that high, then you're eventually going to hit one of them and kill the enemy, and they're going to complain that you made a 10 or 12 Swift Stride, and then you got to sit there and be like, but you gave me the chance, and I took enough of it, right? So what happens with aggro army sometimes is, it's like both ways. You can have the downside of whiffing because you don't have many attacks or static res, but also if you set yourself up to take do these long charges or these big moves where the downside is minimal because maybe the enemy didn't punish you, well, then at some point you're going to make the charge and the enemy's going to get punished, and they're going to complain that it was luck that you made it. But if you take 5-10% chances, it's like 50% chance that you make one of them. And if it's big enough and game bringing enough, then that's fine, right? So, and there's another, if you want to take the adage of you miss every shot you don't take, the enemy passes every check they don't take, right? Every panic check, every march check, every reform check, every redirect, every check they don't take is another chance for them to not get unlucky. And only it's not to roll something crazy, right? So there's moments if you watch games where you're like, making this unit take a march check barely, it could be big. Maybe it's rerollable 8. Rerollable 8's failable. Maybe it's just leadership 9. Maybe, you know what I mean? Make them get lucky in a sense. Like, make them take terror checks. Make them do things. If you never make them do something, they're going to pass everything. And obviously you have to be smart about it. You can't do it and like sacrifice other things. But I think there's moments where people don't force their opponents to like maybe get some luck or try to get some luck or something like that. And it's about making your own luck too, I say. Put yourself in positions where you can get lucky with a little downside, because if you take enough chances, you'll pass it. So that's kind of the rant there. I think for the most part, people feel they're unlucky or like to bitch about luck, but honestly, they just did stupid things. And yes, in the moment, things can happen bad. You spike rolls. It's not that crazy, guys. It really isn't that crazy to spike some rolls here and there. And you're probably negating the rolls that didn't spike or spiked the other way or spiked in your favor, mainly because of how you perceive dice rolls and how you think about them. I also think you kind of have to get in the mindset of like just accepting what happens, right? Dice are going to be rolled and things are going to happen. You're going to miss charges. You're going to flee. You're going to, break when you shouldn't have, blah, 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 or quote unquote shouldn't have. You're going to fail, a cold blood leadership 8, and you're going to be like, God damn it. And I think to lead to that, one little segue, the last part is people like to look from the end of the game to the beginning of the game. And really, you should look closer to the beginning of the game to the end of the game. So what happens a lot is people play the game and shit dies, and then, last turn it comes down to, I don't know, fucking, I'm trying to move my stuff. Let's see if dice rolls. Roll. Right? It comes down to some stupid thing like this, where, I don't know, this guy has 3 wounds left, or 2 wounds left, 1 wound left, and the elder attacks him and doesn't kill him. And the guy's like, fuck, unlucky, blah, 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 didn't kill him. And really, sure, in the last moments, there's been moments in games where it was like a 3-dice dispel versus a 5-dice, or 3-dice cast versus a 5-dice dispel. And if he doesn't get it off, and he got it, I get 2 extra battle points. And that's you can kind of pinpoint that and be like, that sucks. But then you could say, well, in my magic phase, I got kind of lucky to blow up his guy, so maybe I should have not had points there. And then you think back and say, well, I made this move wrong, right? This charge, I shouldn't have done this. And you kind of have to rewind it to the beginning of the game, because maybe you just made a flawed error in the first turn or deployment. Because really, a lot of games I play, like by turn 3, things are always happening and you have to adapt to them, but you could say like, oh, I shouldn't have put this unit here. Like, I just shouldn't have put this unit here. But people like to go and start at the end of the game where they're like, oh, this dice roll didn't go well. Well, maybe you shouldn't have been there. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. Maybe you could have prevented it or given yourself more luck earlier in the game by doing a different strategy. Honestly, I think it was Furion who said this, where deployment is like, I don't know what his percent was, but 40 or 50% of the game was like deployment in turn 1. Like, you can just look at games and be like, this is over. It's just over, turn 1. Like, and then you see games where, and this actually happens more than you think, where like whoever's turn it is, you think is going to win, and then they mess it up, and then they don't do what you want them to do, or you don't think they don't do what's good, and then it's the other person's turn, and they have an opportunity to like crush somebody, and they don't do it. And that's just 2 inexperienced players at that point playing. But I guess, the whole story here is, if you can get your mindset off of dice specifically and just accept that rolls are more likely to happen than you think. And sure, good players will lose once in a while, especially versus other good players because of some rolls. And maybe it's a matchup of somebody really shooty versus somebody who's more aggressive. And sometimes, the shooty person only has to do so much to win. Like, it's like, I hope my fucking cannons hit. Right? That's like a thing that happens. And that's frustrating, I think, as a player, when a weaker player takes a list that kind of just sits there and absorbs. And if you don't attack it properly, or it just rolls like super good with shooting, it kind of destroys the fun of the game, because there's no like that is like just dice rolls at that point. And there's other things you can do, I'm sure, but that's probably feels the worst in Warhammer, is where you don't feel like you got outplayed. You feel like you got, like, they just sat there and took it. And I think, there's a lot of players out there who are solid, who make their quote-unquote name on just being a wall that's hard to break through. And, you're probably not going to win a ton of tournaments, maybe if you play bad people who, like, don't know how to approach you. But it kind of just makes you solid, right? Because in the battle of the bad people or the worst players, like just sometimes having these solid lists that can take less risks and stuff is better because, a bad player with a risky army is more likely to make a mistake and then get crushed. One of the easiest opponents in Warhammer is a bad vampires player, in my opinion, because they tend to make a mistake with their units and give you like free overruns and give you like crumbles and just like and you just like wipe them off the board. Whereas like I find something like 2x6 Feldrax to be a challenge even if the player isn't super high caliber, because the unit itself is just very tough to kill, and so you have to approach it right, and you can do it and you can beat it. It's just, I don't know, it has a different feel to it. Or like Gunline Dwarves, right? Gunline Dwarves, you can, if they just shoot you off the board, then it's like, oh fuck. And I've seen them mess up too, but that's kind of the point I'm trying to get at is, that kind of helps people in the middle tables and stuff. But you can't think like that. You kind of have to think of just like, all right. You also have to take chances. I think that's another thing too. He can't kill everything is a phrase I've been saying a lot with this army. And I think Smith does a good job of this where, you can do your best to mitigate damage. But at some point, think of it from the shooting enemy side. And this, I don't have an example up. But if you like put this here, right? I'm just put it in the army here. If you put this here and the Herald here, and and you're fucking, if you're like this, let's just assume that this is something. He can't shoot everything, right? He can't kill every model you have, most likely, with shooting. Maybe if he's ID, he can. And so maybe he kills your fucking general. But if this gets in and this gets in and this gets, maybe you just break him and kill him like that. Maybe you sacrifice this, but it took every single shooting he had. What some people do is they like, oh, I'll put out one Elder and then I'll hide this behind a hill and this behind this. And then they just shoot the one that's out. And they're like, oh, well, maybe I'll put this one out. You know what I mean? But, there's people who say, if you just rush somebody, some armies, I'm not saying like, there's some armies you just rush them and be like, all right, I'm putting my army in front of you. If 2 units make it through, you're dead. Good luck with your shooting. And then you actually roll the math on it. And you're like, wow, that's not that crazy. Especially like cannons and stuff where it's like, if it hits or it doesn't hit, it's a big variability there. So this is kind of a rant about averages and luck, and really try to focus on what you could have done better and the skewness of dice, the odds. Warhammer's a game of odds. It's not a game of averages, as you can see. And that's why I use that Excel tool I made, because sometimes you just want to know, like, what's the chance I spike high? What's the chance? I mean, you could go and do the math of, if you have 4 dice versus 5 dispel dice, what's the chance you get a 4 die spell off first 5? I think it's like, it's not as bad as you think. I think it's like 30 or 40%. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I have to do the math. But also, like, in that case, if you're rolling 2 dice versus 3 dice. Oh, here's the last one. God, I keep talking because I keep thinking of things. But I promise this is my last comment. Think of this situation. You have 3 dice left versus a 4 dice left. Well, 2 versus 3. You're going to roll the 2 versus the 3, right? But I think sometimes what people do is, I haven't done the math on this yet, but let's say the spells are Hellfire and, I don't know, Pentagram of Pain, right? If these were 2 spells left and you was 2 versus 3 dice, what is the best number of dice to roll? And you might say, well, I'd roll 2 dice at Pentagram. And the math might say you should roll 2 dice at big Hereditary, right? And I'm thinking in my head, you need a 10 to get it off. And you might not get it. But the thing is, you have to look at the probability. So there's a graph. There's a probability graph of what you roll and what they roll, right? If you roll a 5 and get the spell off, right, or 7, what's the chance they dispelled on 3 dice? Oh, they failed it. This is where the math comes in. This might be an extreme example, to be fair. Basically what I'm saying is, how am I going to put this? To beat their 3 dice, you probably need to roll pretty high on 2 dice. So, like, rolling a 1 to 7 doesn't matter. 2 to 7. Because they're going to dispel it most of the time anyway. I think this would be more useful if this was like a 9 to cast, right? Because I think 9's a critical point in the math. Where you can say they're probably going to roll an 8 on 3 dice, at least. Or at least a 7. So the only time it'll matter is if you roll the 8 and you would have got this spell off, but you wouldn't have got this spell off. But if you roll the 9 or the 10 and you get the spell off, you want to be, this is the one you want to get off. It's way more value. So I think that's a big thing too. And also, I've seen where you have 3 dice left and it's like, I can do Comet or I can do Pentagram. Well, Pentagram's pretty much auto on 3 dice, on 5. Not auto, but high enough odds. But, Comet, I didn't get it. Damn, the stupid real ones. Comet isn't auto. It's like 50-some%, I think. The thing is, if you do it twice over 2 turns, 1 Comet is probably worth more than 2 Pentagrams. Situations withstanding about healing and stuff. Or, do you need to do 1 wound to fast scav or whatnot? It depends on, situationally, it's always a question. But sometimes people want the guaranteed spell of like, I only have Pentagram left, but, take the 50-50 because there's a chance it could happen and be huge. There's also a chance if you do it twice in 2 turns, right? If you roll at a Comet twice, you didn't get it, and then you do it the next turn, and you got it, right? Let's say the same situation. You have 3 dice, they have 0. Is this 1 Comet more stronger than 2 Pentagrams of pain? Depends on the situation. But give yourself a chance to get lucky and understand that you don't need to get, is D6 Strength 4 going to change the game on a 90% chance versus, a 50% chance at a Comet? It could fail, but, the upside is super huge. Anyway, that's my little rant about dice and luck, and hopefully you guys can take this into your future Ocho games and think about things like that, and just have a better perspective on getting better.